So let's try to summarize all the things that we've learned about the singleton. So first of all, we saw that making a safe singleton, and by safe I mean a kind of lazy thread safe construct, is fairly easy. You simply use a lazy of t and you return its value. That's pretty much all there is to it. You'll notice that in this section of the course, I did not delve into the variations on the singleton, like for example double checked locking and an inner static class with a static empty constructor, that sort of stuff. You can find it elsewhere, but essentially I've given you, in the very first example, I've given you the safest, the most usable construct for making a singleton, if in fact you do need an explicit singleton. Now, like I mentioned, singletons are difficult to test, and if you hardcode a singleton into your designs, it's going to be really difficult for you to change it to something else later on. So instead, what you should do is you should follow the dependency inversion principle, which means that instead of depending on a concrete implementation of a singleton like my singleton.instance, what you should do is you should depend on an abstraction. Your components which need a singleton should take an argument perhaps of an interface type, so that instead of this singleton that you're feeding in, you can feed in something else. You can feed in a fake object if you're doing unit testing, for example. And finally, the last thing I wanted to mention is that you should really consider defining a singleton lifetime, not explicitly in the component, but instead doing it in a dependency injection container. Now, I know many of you really want to prevent people from calling the constructor and instantiating this object, but really, if you're using dependency injection pervasively in your application, it's not such a big problem. And keep in mind that with tools like ReSharper, you can always go to the constructor of that object and you can just shift F12 to find all the usages of that constructor. And you can find all the usages and see whether somebody is actually misbehaving and not using dependency injection. But really, the socially acceptable way of using a singleton is by specifying it in the dependency injection container as a singleton, and then it will automatically be injected into every component which requires a singleton as a single instance, and no more than one instance will be created in your application, which is what we all want in the first place.